defer. You good? That's good. Good morning, folks, and welcome to the January 6, 2020 Reorganization Meeting of the Worcester Board of Supervisors. I'd ask you to please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. My name is Rick DiLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Susan Coughlin, who is our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who is our third member. Tommy Ryan is our township manager at the end of the table, and Bob Brandt is our solicitor on the side table. First and foremost is informational items, and I believe we do have an informational item, Tommy.
We do have three items. A note that today's meeting is being videotaped for rebroadcast. Second, confirmation that Supervisor Quigley did, as required by the second-class Township Code, take the oath of office and submitted it to the Township Secretary prior to this reorganization meeting. And third, the Board of Supervisors will meet now in executive session to discuss a matter of personnel.
Okay, folks, we'll be as quick as we can, but we need to meet in executive session on an item, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, folks, thanks for your patience. Moving forward with our agenda, the first item on our agenda is public comment period. We do ask that you limit 5 minutes to your public comment. Does anybody have any public comment for the board at this time? Winnie?
I'll be brief.
Okay.
Woody Hayes, Fisher Road. Just encourage the supervisors to think about when they appoint volunteers to the Comprehensive Plan Committee, to appoint a number, a large enough number that it's representative of folks in the township. So not a group of 5 or 6, but perhaps a larger group. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your comments. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board at this time? Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. You find this hard to believe, but I agree with Winnie that.
Hold on, I want to write that down.
I'm not talking, well, in one respect, the idea behind a larger number of people is diversity. But you can also get diversity from a smaller number.
Okay.
So I'm going to take it one step further and say make the committee diverse.
Okay.
Okay? So, you don't put 5 Friends of Worcester people on there because you're going to get what you got in 2008. So you want to make sure you get a cross-section of the community. That's everybody. The executive session.
Yep.
Can you be more specific on what you guys just did? Hiring, firing, discipline, blah, whatever?
You're really, personnel, as you know, is an exemption from Sunshine Law. You can have a meeting about that. And we just generally keep it as personnel rather than to be more detailed about it.
Right, but under the Sunshine Law, and actually it's the Reading Eagle case, you have to be more specific.
I understand.
So if you can just give us, it lists in the Sunshine Law what the reasons are. Discipline, hiring, firing. You don't have to mention who it is, but you definitely got to give us an idea of what the indication is.
Well, yeah, I understand, and I'll still stand by my statement. It was a personnel matter.
Well, yeah, but for what reason?
Personnel.
Well, how do I know?
Pardon?
How do I know that
So-
what you're telling me is true?
Well, you can take my word for it.
Right. So you're the arbiter of your own executive session?
No, that's not a fair way
Well,
to put
you
it.
know why you announce executive sessions?
Pardon me?
Why you have to announce executive sessions to the public?
Right.
Why?
Well, because the public needs to understand what the board's talking about.
No, it's so the public can make a determination of whether you're holding an appropriate executive session,
I see.
right?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, well, how am I going to make that determination when you say personnel?
So I'm not
Well,
going to get into debate.
well,
with you.
you're wrong, just so you know. The last meeting, I guess, we talked about, there was some concern about Mr. Quigley not being able to make a later meeting, and how Susan Coughlin wanted to make this meeting at nighttime.
Yep,
Remember that?
I do.
Well, I went back and looked at my tapes back for 10 years. I've been coming to this meeting for 10 years, and every time come to this microphone and ask you guys to change it from the 11 o'clock to the evening. I'll give you an example. In 2012, when Art Bustard was the chair, I raised the issue, said it wasn't good, people couldn't make it, couldn't attend. I asked to have it changed at night, around 6 to 7 o'clock. Nothing. Susan Coughlin was up there too. Zero action on that.
Okay.
Then, in the 2018 meeting, when Susan Coughlin was chair, I asked you guys to make a motion to change the meeting from 11 to 7. You know what Susan Coughlin said? Oh, there's a public comment period. So I guess my question to you is, I've been sitting here asking for a change in the meetings for, 10 years. All of a sudden, Susan Coughlin flips her idea of whether it's a good idea or not, because for the past 10 years, she's been on the side of leaving it the way it is, and that last meeting, she wants to change it to night. So can she figure out whether or not she's for it or against it? Because for the last 10 years, she's been against it.
Okay.
Now, the last meeting, I also discussed the State Ethics Commission looking into Worcester Township. You remember that, right?
I do.
Right? And I asked Susan Coughlin about, what's the story? How come they're looking into Worcester's open space program? And she said that they were looking into the farm board. Remember that?
I do.
They're not looking into the farm board, are they, Steve?
No comment.
No comments, right. Well, the thing I found funny was I get a phone call from a guy named Michael Evans. You know who Michael Evans is?
I do.
Michael Evans has got a big tract of land. He calls me up to see what I know because he's got to give a deposition or gave a deposition in front of the Ethics Commission. Right? So what does that tell you? If
No
Michael
comment.
Evans in Worcester Township and his property's up for acquisition is being deposed by the State Ethics Commission, is it more likely that Worcester's being investigated or the farm board's being investigated, would you say?
No comment, Jim.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else have any additional public comment for the board at this time?
I just want to clarify that I did not indicate my thinking that the farm board was under investigation, and if that was the impression that I gave, I wish to remove that impression because I do not have any indication that the farm board is under any such investigation. And as Mr. DiLello has said, we don't have any comment on investigations.
Come forward.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to third,
can you-
sorry, Karen Corbett,
Okay.
over on Stump Hall Road. I just wanted to third what Winnie said about making sure that there's a larger group. I think, you'll have to make it sizable to be effective, but also to take into consideration, that there's a number of people that really want to be involved. Obviously, some will probably end up leading more than others, but, to make sure that we include as many as possible so that we have the diversity of ideas and also representatives of ideas that are proportional with the ideas in the community. I also just want to say that I know there's a lot of people that wanted to be at this meeting today. I know this is normal course of business to hold it at this time this year.
Yep.
And I trust that the supervisors will take into account, the ideas from the community. I think you guys are well connected and understand, what it is people want. And I hope you just, continue to honor that.
Sure.
That's it.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. I'll make one comment to that. I understand people couldn't be at this meeting based on the time. I've been in the audience for a bunch of years before I sat up here. We don't think somebody's not interested because they're not here. We had roughly 30 volunteers for that. When we appoint volunteers, we don't hold it against somebody who couldn't be at a meeting or could be at a meeting. It doesn't ultimately logistically, we still understand that those folks certainly want to participate. Is there any additional public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. So, folks, if you haven't been to one of these reorganization meetings, there's a lot of sort of protocol that we need to do logistically that we move through fairly quickly, and then there's other parts that'll probably take a little while and take some public comment. So we'll try to work through the parts that are quick as quickly as we can, so there's time for the more important stuff as we get to it. So the first official action item we have is the motion, and keep in mind, we're following the state second-class township code requirements when we do some of these things, even though they may seem a little bit odd in the order that we do them. First thing is the appointment of a temporary chair.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend Rick DiLello as a temporary chair.
I'll second that. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the appointment of Rick DiLello as temporary chair? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item is the appointment of a temporary secretary. I make a motion that we appoint Tommy Ryan as the temporary secretary.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item on our agenda is a motion to appoint a chair for the Board of Supervisors for 2020.
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Rick DiLello as chair of the Board of Supervisors, 2020.
I will second that. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next item on our agenda is the appointment of a vice chair to the Board of Supervisors.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend Steve Quigley as vice chair of the Board of Supervisors.
I will second that. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye.
Opposed.
Opposed? Okay.
Opposed.
It passes 2-1. Okay, so the next item on our agenda are what we call official appointments, and then we have a motion to appoint official positions. So folks, in your packets, and Tommy, they all have these, correct?
Yes.
So in the packet, there's a memo section that lists out a series of appointments that are both official, and then we'll get to volunteer, which are on the next page and thereafter. So these would be the ones, I guess, would be on page 3. And these are the official appointments for 2020. And we do try to do them as an entire slate in order to save time. So I will entertain a motion if somebody wants to make a motion on the official appointed positions.
Mr. Chairman, I make that motion for the appointment of official positions as noted from A to double B. That being the Township Manager, Secretary Tom Ryan, the Zoning Officer, the Right to Know Officer Tom Ryan, the Pension Plan Administrator Tom Ryan, Finance Director Eric Paquette, Treasurer Erica, Assistant Treasurer Nicole, Assistant Zoning Officer Andrew, Assistant Zoning Officer CKS, Assistant Secretary Nicole, Public Works Director Robert, Fire Marshal Dave Cornish, Emergency Management Coordinator John Kelly, Deputy Emergency Management Coordinator Brian Newell, Deputy Emergency Management Coordinator Nathan Donato, Building Code Official Keystone Municipal Service, Inc., Township Engineer CKS, Township Traffic Engineer McMahon, Township Solicitor Robert L. Brandt, PSAT Convention Delegates Rick DiLello, PSAT Convention Delegate Susan Coughlin, PSAT Convention Delegate Steve Quigley, PSAT Convention Voting Delegate, we'll leave that up, Delegate Montgomery County Tax Collector Committee Tom Ryan, Alternate Delegate Montgomery County Tax Committee Erica, Alternate Delegate Montgomery County Tax Collector Committee Nicole, and Deputy Tax Collector Lori Augustine.
I will second that. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the official appointments for 2020? Jim?
Jim Mollick again. As far as the solicitor goes,
Okay.
Mr. Brandt, I totally support that idea, with the understanding that if you remember when Mr. Ryan took over, it took Mr. Ryan, 9 months to realize that Mr. Garrity was, I don't know what term to use, but he was spending $250 grand a year of our taxpayer money. Mr. Garrity. Ryan gets Mr. Brandt, and now our legal bills every year have been $60,000. I think it's 3 years now. And if you do the math, that's about $450,000 that has been saved over 3 years.
Yep.
Now, the only, problem I have with Mr. Brandt is I think you need to get a stipend for him to go get a right-to-know course. So, if you can do that, that'd be good. As far as Tommy Ryan goes as a right-to-know officer, by far, the best right-to-know officer that I've ever dealt with. I'm dealing right now with Methacton School District. They're spending close to $20,000 a month, and they will not answer right-to-know requests. So you don't get an answer after 5 days, or you don't get an answer after 30 days, and then you're forced to appeal every right-to-know request that you make to the Office of Open Records. So it turns a request into about a 4 to 5 month ordeal, and it generates a ton of money for the solicitor. So what you got going on here is somebody who knows the right-to-know law, who pretty much grants every request and is extremely transparent, versus what we got over at the school district. So I think you guys made some good picks. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any additional public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, we have volunteer appointments and standing positions. So, folks, this will be on the next page of your packets. So a couple things before we get started. They're all listed alphabetically, just so people understand kind of how they're laid out. And then some of them are italicized in the different sections. And what that means, if the person is italicized, it means he or she currently has that position on that particular board. So that's sort of the logistics of that. We'll start at the top and just sort of work our way down. And I would say that we handle these independently, as we've typically done that in the past. First is the Vacancy Board Chair, and this is a one-year term which will expire at the end of this year. Currently, that's served by Bob Andorn. Does anybody wish to make a motion to reappoint Bob to that role?
I'd like to move that we appoint former Supervisor Art Bustard. I think he's excellently qualified to do the job. The job of Vacancy Board Chair is very limited, but it's good to have supervisory experience, and I think Art has a lot of that. I think he would be a good Vacancy Board Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to reappoint the vacancy chair, current chairman Bob Anhorn.
Okay. I think Art certainly is also a fine choice as well. I will say, I won't let the cat out of the bag, but I guess I have a different thought for Art a little later in this discussion. So I am fine with reappointing, and I will second reappointing Bob Andorn to the vacancy chair position at this time. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the vacancy chair motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, passes 2-1. So next we have Planning Commission, and there's going to be 2 Planning Commission appointments. Currently, Tony Shear serves on the Planning Commission. He would like to continue to serve. Does anybody wish to make a motion to either reappoint Tony or appoint somebody else for that first position?
I will move that we reappoint Mr. Scher to the Planning Commission position.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to reappoint Tony Shear to the Planning Commission. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. Have any of you guys attended a planning commission meeting while Mr. Shear's been the chair?
No, I don't believe I have. I served with Tony when I was on there, but no, I don't believe I've been to a meeting since Tony's been chair.
Well, I have.
Okay.
And, I don't like to use descriptive adjectives, but this is one of my son's favorite, and it just sums up what you see at the Planning Commission. It's a clown show,
Okay.
okay? It's a clown show. And Tony is the head of the clown show, all right? And if you look at what happened with the Center Point ordinance, you know, we had a joint meeting here where Tony's telling you guys one thing, that, hey, we're going to do this, X, Y, and Z. Then he goes back to the Planning Commission and does something entirely different. Entirely different, because I'm there. You gave him instructions, and he goes to the Planning Commission and does something entirely different, okay? And if you look at how that whole situation went down with Center Point, it's just ridiculous, okay? And the way the meetings are conducted now, I think you ought to video them to get some idea of what Tony's about. Tony's fairly abrasive, okay? Very abrasive and not very cooperative and doesn't really take public input very well, all right? So I think you got to have somebody in there who's a little bit more even-tempered, willing to listen, and who's got the best interest of basically the whole township at heart. Because he seems to have an agenda. I don't know whether you know that or not. Do you know his agenda? Are these people supposed to
Jim,
be?
I don't know.
Are they supposed to be impartial when it comes to their job?
There's a number of skill sets that they bring to the Planning Commission, and certainly impartiality is one of the traits we like to have there. But ultimately, it's multiple traits that they're going to
Right.
bring to the role.
Well, I was there for the Smith property.
Okay?
You know, the, not Ollie, the other one. Larry Smith or Melissa Smith, their property.
Yep.
I asked several questions about what the purpose was, what they were doing. They didn't have a clue. They made a motion to approve it without even knowing what the substance of what was going on. Tony had to withdraw the motion and have another meeting to get the job done. So it's almost like a rubber stamp, don't look at it, don't analyze it. So, you know, my impression is you're making a mistake,
Okay.
all right?
I appreciate your public comment on that. Is there anybody else? Bob? And then I'll come to you, Winnie.
Bob Andor, Worcester. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So along the lines of what Jim just said, and in full disclosure, my name is on the list of potential candidates for the Planning Commission.
Yep.
I would offer what I feel my credentials are, but I don't want to take that time. The one comment I would like to make is I believe it's essential that there be a disclosure on these candidates as to whether these candidates are part of any particular advocacy board or group that has a specific meeting or agenda as they move forward. I don't believe it's a prerequisite to be a member of those types of things, nor do I believe it should be a disqualifier.
Right.
But I believe that it ought to be at least known, and specifically because I believe that a vast number of the members of the current Planning Commission and/or previous Planning Commissions have all been members of a specific advocacy board, and I think you've eliminated some of the diversity in terms of thought and comment, and you get to a group that's just parroting what they have as their agenda.
Okay.
For the record, I will just make the comment that I am not a member of any advocacy boards or groups that would have any particular agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate your comments. Winnie, did you have a comment as well?
Just to clarify for the record, if Bob is referring to Tony's membership in Friends of Worcester, he is not an active member. He may have made donations, as has about 1,000 people in this township over the years. So he's not an active member. He doesn't attend meetings. He doesn't set the agenda for the group. None of the above. I'm in support of Tony. I think he's done an excellent job as chair. I think he's is impartial. I think he is a strong chair, and I have attended those meetings since he's been chair, and I think he runs a well-run meeting. So I'm in support of his reappointment. I think he's done a good job. I think having an attorney on that group is a skill set that's useful, and he has some experience in that space. So I would highly support his reappointment.
Okay. Is there any additional public comment regarding the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So Tony's reappointment. Before we get started with the next appointment, I do want to make sort of a general comment that I've made in the past when it comes to picking individuals for volunteer roles. We, as a board, try to separate the wheat from the chaff. We understand that individuals have various boards they may serve on and different things. I think Bob makes a good point, in terms of saying, hey, is that something that should be part of the makeup when you share that? It's always the delicate area because they're volunteers. And some of the question about videotaping those meetings as well has been centered around respecting their privacy as volunteers, but also understanding that they're serving in a public role there. So there's not been a perfect answer to that. But invariably, what we try to do is there's going to be varying opinions on different candidates, and that's the nature of it. And we hope that we're trying to slice through that as best we can to try to get a combination of individuals that can serve the role that we're asking them to do. So that's sort of my generic clause, because as you saw, we had some disagreement on someone, and I'm quite certain we'll have some disagreement on some other appointments as we move forward. That's just the nature of the beast. We'll do the best we can to try to get the most, the best cross-section we can on everything that we do. But I do appreciate the comments on that. Next, we have a second appointment to our Planning Commission. I do want to make a quick comment, Steve, before I ask you, is Gordon Todd chose not for reappointment. I do want to just publicly sort of recognize Gordon. We do he served for a long, long time on that board and felt it was time for him to sort of move on. We certainly appreciate all the years. I think it was well past 30 years in terms of serving on that particular board, but he chose that as his term expired this year, he did not want reappointment. So that's why there is an open position. Steve, do you have somebody that you wish to nominate at this time?
Mr. Chairman, before we go regarding that, I'd like to make a follow-up comment to the comment you made. We supervisors go to Hershey for 3 or 4 days every year to talk to supervisors from other parts of the state. It's sort of a fact-finding mission as well as an educational experience for those of us there, and we're able to interact with supervisors from across the state of Pennsylvania. And I remember when I first became a Board of Supervisors member, I was so-called pressured into becoming the secretary, which I rejected that item, saying that I thought being at the meeting was more important for me to listen than rather than sit there and scribe down all the information going on in the meeting. On my first bus trip, I took a poll of the supervisors on the 50-person bus, and of the 50 members on that bus, only one township had an active supervisor being the recording secretary of the meetings, which I guess to my point proved that I wasn't the only person that thought that a township supervisor shouldn't be there taking notes. He's there to pay attention to the people rather than taking notes. So I say that with a follow-up that going to these meetings, you talk to people in other parts of the state, it's just not Worcester, how they conduct business, how they put people on these commissions and appointments, and the credentials associated with that. If they're involved in a certain business that may have a conflict of interest with the township, supposedly, they look at that as an educational aspect, that they bring a different view to the board or towards the other committees. We're all not created the same. We all have a different thought process. But a lot of times, if we have people with different backgrounds and educated, and that's their business, I think it brings a diversity to the township. So that's the thought process that I use when trying to appoint these people to the different committees within the township. That being said, Mr. Chairman, for the second appointment to the 4-year term that will expire in 12/31/23 for the Planning Commission, I nominate Bob Andhorn to that open position.
Okay. Susan, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. My thought is that the Planning Commission reflects the makeup of the township. Right now, there are 3 men and 1 woman on the Planning Commission, and I would prefer to see another woman on the Planning Commission, and to that end, I would offer Stephanie Bailey's name. I'm looking at her qualifications. She has an advanced degree, a lot of management experience. She's been chair of volunteer committees, and I do not know her well, but as I have known her to the extent that I do, I see her as a person who is very willing to listen to viewpoints. I don't hear her giving a strong opinion. A lot of times I hear her listening and asking questions, and I like that. So I would like to nominate Stephanie Bailey for a position on the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up to Susan's comments, I'm sure we'll do this. You know, I think it's important I accept Susan's comments, but you judge a person by the interaction you have with the people, and not that I often agree with Bob. Sometimes I strongly disagree with him on some of the items, but I think that makes the world go round on some of his comments sometimes. But I think Bob's a thinker. He thinks outside the box as well as inside the box, which we have to appreciate that. And I think that he has a view different than the board. He'll express that. I think it's important in that position to be open-minded and willing to look at the information. And for the past number of years, Bob's been a faithful person coming to the meetings, either the work sessions or the nighttime meetings. And I believe he goes to some of the planning commission meetings as well as the zoning meetings as well. So I think he showed that he's been involved somewhat. And the planning commission is an important spot within the township. And I think, as Susan mentioned, having someone that knows what's happening, I think is very important. For that reason, that's my recommendation for Bob Anhorn.
Appreciate both recommendations. I guess a couple of quick comments in terms of that. I think it's important to note that there's always more than one candidate that can serve a role. You know, we don't have just one person who necessarily is perfect in any role, ultimately. In full disclosure, I met with Bob well over a year ago, maybe even it was 2 years ago, and asked him to serve at that time on the Planning Commission if he was interested. I've actually been asking him for a couple of years to do that. So ultimately, I'm glad that you have nominated him. I have no issue with Stephanie Bailey as a candidate that you've nominated in any way. I don't have any specific, hey, I don't think she should be on that for one reason or the other. In this particular case, I think that my support will go behind Bob because I've asked him to serve. He's now been nominated, and I want to second that specific motion. So it's been moved and seconded to appoint Bob Andorn to the second Planning Commission opening. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Jim.
Jim Malik, Worcester. Thing I have a problem with is, and I don't have a problem with Bob Andorn, I have a problem with putting people on because of their gender.
Okay.
She should be on because she's a woman. He should be on because he's a man. No. They should be put on because of their qualifications and their right for the job. If it happens to be a woman, fantastic. Happens to be a guy, okay. But to say you need to put somebody on to even out the men-woman ratio, that's about the worst rationale I've heard for nominating a planning commission individual, you know, in my career. So, you know, I don't really know Stephanie Bailey. I don't, you know, I listen to people come to the microphone now for what, 13 years? I haven't heard, I mean, maybe I missed it. But I do know Bob Andorn is here every meeting. I do know Bob Andorn, you know, comes up and he's truthful and honest. One thing about Bob, he's truthful and honest, and he's smart to boot. He has a background in land use and everything else. So there's a good pick, somebody who's been at meetings forever, somebody who comes to the microphone and tells the truth, somebody who has a skill set that fits in with the Planning Commission. And that's how you pick somebody. You don't pick them because they're a man, woman, gay, straight, whatever. I mean, social engineering doesn't belong in that process. So that's just my point. Thanks.
Okay, appreciate your comment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Stephanie Bailey.
I'm glad you came, Stephanie.
I've lived here in Worcester now for 14 and a half years. I've been retired for a few years from working for a national company for over 30 years on a lot of management and team building situations, and I thought it was about time that I gave back to Worcester since I really enjoy living in the community. I'm not part of any other groups in Worcester. I think I'm a clean, unused person who's sort of willing to listen to all sides. I was someone who, throughout all my years of work, was looked at as a team builder, willing to frame the conversation to include everybody, willing to bring people forward to listen to diverse opinions. And I also think we need to have some different people. Everyone may know Bob, and I'm sure he's a wonderful person, but it's hard to say someone's honest and someone might not. I don't know how you explain that one way or the other in a situation like this without knowing them very well. But you could speak to my neighbors. I think how you find out how someone is all the people who've lived next door to you over the years. And you could probably ask all my next door neighbors that I've lived next to if, that's the kind of person you'd want to, have in your life or make a decision in your community. And I think you could interview my next door neighbors and find out if I'd be someone that would be willing to stand up, take the time to learn, take the time to offer an honest opinion, take the time to listen to others, and also frame up the conversation in a way that brings forth everyone and not bring forth negative opinions. Try to bring everyone together. And be something I have the time now that I'm retired to put into a new position. Thank you very much.
Stephanie, I appreciate that. I'm going to share a quick little story with you. You can work back to your seat. I actually first asked to serve on a board in 2007, and they said no. And then I asked again in 2008, and there wasn't an opening. And then in 2009, in 2010, in 2011, I eventually got appointed in 2016. Point I'm making is, I love that you're interested. I'd love you to stay interested, even if we don't necessarily have a role for you specifically today. One of the things that I certainly support is having a long list of volunteers so that when things open up for whatever reason, we have ready candidates who have expressed interest and are still interested and love our community for a variety of different reasons. And so ultimately, I think it's great that you've expressed interest. I'd love you to stay interested, even though in this particular case, we're not going to appoint you to the Planning Commission today. As I said, I love having people involved, stay involved. Certainly there may be opportunities either later today or down the line as well. So I do appreciate you coming to the meeting as well.
Thank you.
Is there, Winnie?
I'm disappointed that you and Steve have made up your mind already. I, too, would like to recognize Bob's service to the township. He faithfully comes to multiple meetings month after month after month. But my concerns about Bob fall into two categories. One, we have appointed him as the vacancy board chair. And though that position is not often tapped to serve an active role, it is tapped on occasion. And it's a really important role and a role with power in the township. So I would say that's one reason I probably would not like to see him on the Planning Commission.
Just to confirm, Gordon Todd served in both capacities for many years.
I know he did. It doesn't mean I agreed with that, but that's a good point. I think those are two separate positions. The other position I have is that he has a very strong position that is in the direction of developers. And I don't think that necessarily represents a majority of people in this township. Individuals from that background with that aptitude, if you will, express their position frequently in front of the Planning Commission board. They don't necessarily need an advocate on that board, and I do see him as an advocate. I see someone like Stephanie Bailey as more open, more receptive, a better listener, someone who will take input in from multiple sources, and I think that's really an important attribute for this kind of role. I'd like to also make a comment about Jim's comment about never judge positions based on the sex or the gender of the individual. I'm a woman. Susan's a woman. I can tell you that through my professional career, especially in early days, women were often excluded from positions of decision-making and power. And women do bring a perspective sometimes to a situation that men don't have. It doesn't mean that their gender should be the only prerequisite that you use in voting for them. I certainly don't do that in voting for elected people, but it is an attribute that has some value. Women and men are different sometimes in terms of how they look at things. And certainly as it relates to community and home, women bring, I think, a unique perspective. So I would just like to make that observation. And again, a recommendation that perhaps you two rethink whether it's time to appoint Bob, he's already been appointed to one position, or whether it's more appropriate to appoint someone who does not have a fixed perspective on things like that. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Kim, I'll come back to you. Karen, you can come forward.
Hi, again, Karen Corbett. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know Bob or Stephanie, so I won't comment on them individually.
Sure.
But as far as the selection process goes, I do think it's important, and you know these individuals, that there is, definitely people that want to keep the rural nature of Worcester, and that also do allow for, the right kinds of development and responsible development in certain locations. I personally love the rural nature, which I've told you before at other meetings, but I also am an attorney in construction and real estate. So I think there's a place for both of it, and I hope that when you make your selection and you're making these decisions, that you do take all of that into account and make sure that both are honored and able to proceed responsibly. I will say, though, that I do agree with Susan, and thank you so much for noting that it would be nice to have a little diversity, gender diversity as well is another form of diversity. I think it's interesting that the public comment that followed that was commenting that somebody would be selected because of their gender and did not note the numerous other qualifications that were listed and put forth. And it's that reason why I would submit to you that gender diversity is important. Thank you.
Karen, I appreciate that. So a couple of comments. First is when individuals come and give their public comment, it is typically the board's stance that we allow the public comment, even whether we agree or disagree. And in many cases, we don't specifically comment on somebody's public comment. What I will tell you is I'm very comfortable with the gender question. I've worked with and for my wife for over 25 years. I work in an office where I am the only male. It is all women. I think they're tremendously professional. I think they're exceptional people. We have hired across 25 years, it was maybe been 95% female to male in terms of the ratio. I have no qualms about that at all. We typically just try not to get into a tit for tat with folks at the mic on those different things, but invariably it exists, it's part of the equation. We try to weigh all the pieces at the end of the day. I do still feel strongly that Bob is the appropriate candidate here. There is a motion on the floor. There's been a second. Is there any additional public comment? I'm sorry. We'll take right here, and then I'll take you, Bob.
Hi, Mike Hickey.
Good morning. Can you just wait till you get to the mic, Mike? So,
Okay, Mike Hickey.
because we're recording it, and then
Most of you here, you're all new faces to me, except for Mr. Ryan here.
okay.
And I've been in township for 5 years, and I'd like to see what's going on. There's been a lot of evolution I see, especially recently, and that's why I'm here, to get my finger on the pulse, as it were.
Sure.
You're going through a list of names here. I've now met 2 of them, not met them, but I know who they are. These people here, if there's anybody else here that you care to nominate or would like to fill one of these positions, if they are present here today, if they could come up and introduce themselves and give us a little background, please.
They typically do not, Mike. That's not how it works.
Okay.
Ultimately, I appreciate your comments on that, but that's not how it's done.
Okay, good enough, that's all.
Okay. And Bob, I think you had a comment as well?
Bob Andorn. I'd just like to clear up a miscommunication or misqualification.
Okay.
I am a commercial contractor by trade and have been all of my adult life. That being said, I have never done any work in Worcester Township. That's not to say that I wouldn't. 100% of my work is commercial, and there's very little commercial work in Worcester, and therefore I don't specifically market Worcester as an active area. 99 to 100% of my work being commercial and for repeat clients. So that's typically not a market that I would specifically reach out to. And from a development standpoint, I'm not a pro-development individual just because that's my trade. Just as a frame of reference, when the majority of my work is renovation work, 99 to 100% of my work is renovation work, you wouldn't even know that it's taking place as it's indoors, interior. That's not to say that we don't do exterior work, but that doesn't necessarily make me to be a pro-development individual. And so the characterization that I'm a developer and only in favor of that, if you'd like to qualify me or clarify me as anything, please look at me as being a property rights or individual property owner advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate your comments on that. Is there anybody else who has any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Jay.
Jay McKeever, Worcester.
Happy New Year.
Everybody. Just clarification to Mike's comment, and I
Okay.
can't turn around, Mike. I volunteered for one of the positions. There are actually a couple. But, Mike, for your information, we all were asked to submit bios and not quite a resume, and answer questions about why we felt we were qualified and interested in volunteering. So the supervisors all had a good look at each of the and they're making the decision.
Yep.
So just so he's aware,
No, I appreciate that.
it's not a blind
No,
shot.
That's a good point. So in terms of the volunteer process, Mike, folks will submit interest in volunteering at any point throughout the year. That information always comes to the Board of Supervisors, and we have our own. We can't discuss it outside of the public meeting, so individually we each use whatever process works for us. In some cases, we know the individual. In other cases, we don't. We may reach out and meet with them. But for various roles and positions, that's typically how it's done. And when we get to this point of appointment, this is typically not the vetting process, if you will. That's already transpired with each individual supervisor, who will then make a nomination. Then we'll have discussion and ultimately arrive at a motion. And so I should have clarified that when you came up, when you were sort of asking for the other individuals. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. Is there any additional public comment on the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, motion passes 2-1. So next item on our agenda is the Zoning Hearing Board. Currently, Cesar Gambone serves on that board. He is up for reappointment. He has requested to serve again, or is interested in serving again. Does anybody wish to make a motion to reappoint Cesar or appoint somebody else?
I will make a motion to reappoint Mr. Gambone to the zoning board.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay, so next we have the volunteer appointments for the Comprehensive Plan Update Task Force. I'm going to say a couple things and then we'll get started. So we had roughly 30 or 31 folks that were interested in serving. Almost exclusively, they all noted rural character, open space, unique elements to Worcester as items that matter to them. So the pool of candidates, many had those characteristics to them. With 30-some-odd candidates and ultimately whatever number we decide to appoint, I did, for humor's sake, I looked at a combination calculator to see how many different combinations that could be, and it's well over 1 million of different combinations. And I state that only because at the end of the day, we may not agree on all, whatever number it happens to be, but there's literally millions of combinations of people that we can put on this. there was nobody that would automatically be disqualified because they said, well, they want to develop Worcester from one corner to the other. You know, they all had common characteristics of that. And then there were other elements as well that they would put on their application or individually have spoken to us at one point or another. In terms of the board, so there's no great way to do this. We've got 30 individuals. What I would suggest or what I would recommend, and I'll turn to both of you to offer some insight, is that perhaps we start to get some sense of a number and then work back to the people so that we have some idea. You know, a couple of the audience members have, you know, noted a desire to have a larger group versus a smaller group. I certainly have some thoughts on that. I don't want to taint the pool one way or the other. I'm happy to share what they are, or if either one of you wants to kind of talk about the makeup. You know, what I would say is that this task force serves in essence as a subcommittee to our planning commission, and certainly having a couple of members from our planning commission serve on this are things we had talked about in past meetings, and certainly I think that's an important element, but not so much that it creates a quorum to the planning commission, so that would sort of put the number at 2. But again, do either of you have a thought on size of the group as sort of maybe a starting point, or have some thoughts on how we might
Well,
start to tackle that?
Actually, I'm curious about your comment on planning commission members, because I don't see more than 2 planning commission members as a problem on this committee, because it will be a public meeting. Every meeting will be conducted according to state law and the Sunshine Law and the municipalities planning code. The meetings will be advertised. So the fact that there are 3 or 4 planning commission members on this committee, I don't see as a problem unless you do, Mr. Brandt.
I don't think there's any legal problem.
Okay.
Okay, so I would actually propose that we consider inviting any planning commission member who has expressed interest to serve on this committee. And the reason is that the planning commission is the body that will interpret and apply the comprehensive plan every time they see a development plan or any proposal at all that comes before them. So I think that giving them a voice and having them familiar with the comprehensive plan on an intimate level is important.
Okay, it's a good point. I think certainly have a couple things is that the planning commission will get this document before, like that's part of the process too.
It
Is ultimately they'll have, and I don't want to wait it to, otherwise if we, I don't want to wait it to just the planning commission either, but certainly, again, I don't want to get into the weeds on the planning commission just yet in terms of how many specifically. I thought logistically, I was just thinking 2 to not make a quorum, but fair enough. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess my first comment is, Mr. DiLello, is that it's amazing. It's 12:15, and I think Mr. Buster can probably agree with me that when we used to have these reorganization meetings, maybe they lasted 12 minutes. So Worcester is changing. The people have a concern. The residents are coming out, which they didn't do before. You know, it used to be 4 or 5 of us here. Boom, 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 it was done. So I appreciate the comments from the people taking time to come out to the reorganization meeting. And as I said, right after my election recently, that I noticed from knocking on doors, Worcester is a changing place. We have people moving from all over the place. They have different needs and desires from we that have been around a lot longer than some other people. But as I said, if they live in a townhouse and they rent versus owning a 100-acre farm, or they all have one vote within a township, and we have to respect that they are voters in a township, and we have to listen to their concerns as well. That being said, I like the people coming out. I will show you my volunteer appointment sheet. It's not something I made my mind up. I went back and forth, around and around, picking people, crossing people off, going back and forth. So as far as the numbers, Mr. Lello, you know, you could say smaller is better, but in this case, having, you know, I think in the neighborhood, we should at least start in the neighborhood of 10, 12 people, probably. I would think that it gives a nice cross-section for the people being here. I probably have to echo your comments regarding the Planning Commission, that they are a body already within the township. We know the people, and I will make my comment that I'm looking to have a cross-section of people within the township looking at Worcester, not just right now, it's really looking to the future. I forgot to bring with me, I have a plan that the County Planning Commission put out, and Worcester is the first place looking just strictly from commercial shopping centers, strip malls, anything like that. We are probably the first township outside Philadelphia that we don't have anything. I think there's a total of 9 townships within the county that don't employ anything really considered a shopping center. Our small strip centers here or there really don't fit into that picture. But, it's growth is coming. I'm not looking for the growth, but it's something we have to listen to the people that, moving into the area and what their concerns are. And I think that's why we need a larger number of people looking at the items before us. So I think I'd entertain it, just start looking. I threw the number out at 10 people. I can go lower, I can go higher on that, but I think that's a starting point. We at least have to have a broad vision. Once again, if you've been to meetings, I'm sure a lot of you have, we can all testify that sometimes the more people in the meeting, the more problems there are. More voices have to be heard.
Right.
I can surely testify, being a family business, that when you get 9 family members sitting around a table discussing something, it tends to be a long day. So,
Well, I'd just like to clarify that this committee will be run a little bit differently. We do have a professional planner from Montgomery County. I believe we've already made that decision to hire
did.
the county planner.
Yep.
So that person will be running the meeting, setting the agenda, and they do have a script for this. They do a lot of comprehensive plans, so they know how to approach it. So in that sense, this group will be a feedback group. This group will not be running the meeting, that I understand. That's my understanding of it. This group will be providing feedback to the Planning Commission coordinator. We'll be possibly doing outreach. Again, I don't know their plan. So in that sense, I think a larger group is better, because I'd like to get more representation. We need newer residents, we need longtime residents. We do need gender diversity. Dr. Malick's comments were spoken from the dominant gender since almost the world began. The rest of us, as Ms. Corbett and Dr. Hayes and Ms. Bailey explained, are coming at it from a different perspective. And so we need diversity of all sorts, not just gender, but also, as I said, length of time in the township, business perspective, everything. So I would ask the board to consider that we appoint a larger group, knowing that this group won't be sitting around a dining room table making decisions in the same way that the Planning Commission is. This will be a group led by a professional planner with an agenda, with a certain task or set of tasks to perform at each meeting, and I think that that planner will benefit from, I think we'll all benefit from, a larger group with more perspective. And in that vein, I don't know if, in terms of picking, if you want to go back and forth up here and we each pick until we're up to, I'm fine with 24. I'm fine with most of the group, because not everyone will make every meeting. And when they are at the meetings, they will have an opportunity to listen to the planner, provide input to the planner, and as I said, more input, I think, is better. I'm quite confident that any professional planner can handle a group of 24 or 12 or any group, size group, because that's what they do. That's what they do a lot. That's one of their specific tasks, is to manage a group of people and have an outcome.
Okay, so respectfully, I think 24 is far too many. But I don't think 5 is the number either. I mean, I think, so there were two schools of thought that I had that I had jotted down. I mean, I like an odd number, whether that's 9, 11. Steve had said 10 to 12. If you say 11, I had 9 and a couple of alternates, or 11 and a couple of alternates. And the reason I had noted an alternate or two is there's a couple of individuals that are on the list, and specifically Dr. Zerbe is on the list. And I think that he has value as a school board superintendent on a committee like this, but I don't necessarily want him to have a voting stake in terms of, at the end of the day, it's not just the planner plucking everything from the audience and putting a document together. I mean, the group has to make decisions on different things. They're starting with an existing 2008 comprehensive plan to say, does this still reflect? How much does it still reflect? There might be some public outreach, as you say, and exactly how they might tackle the task at hand, but there will be some decision-making that they need to make in terms of recommendations. That's why I think an odd number, but also a number that I've sat on, when you and I were on the Historic Structures Committee back in, I think it was 2005 and 6, I think we had about 11 or 12, if I remember correctly. And again, I'm going from memory. And we certainly got quite a bit of, one, it was hard to, even at that size, it was starting to get hard to keep the meeting on track and moving in a coherent direction. But also, we certainly got a wealth of different opinions in that particular size. But again, I don't have an issue with those who have desire to sit on it, but I think the 24 is far too many, and I think a manageable number is certainly somewhere in that. In the 9 to 12 category was where we saw most of the neighboring communities that have done these projects, and we looked at them. Most of them had groups like that. Most of them had 2 members from their planning commission that served on it. I mean, there were some frameworks that when we looked at it throughout the year that seemed to work and seemed to work well. So in terms of the individuals themselves, I don't know a great way to do that. I mean, we can literally go right down the list, and if there's 2 people that express that, yeah, I could work with that person, and then you kind of try to minimize the slate, or if there's a half a dozen folks that you say, hey, I really feel strongly about these few individuals, I mean, it's certainly not an easy, I don't know how to quite get at it.
I don't think we should go down the list because it's alphabetical, so that's clearly never good for those with last names that are at the end of the alphabet. But if you want to go back and forth across our table, or if you're going to limit the group to the size that you wish to limit it to, then I'm going to suggest something different for the Planning Commission, either to make them ex officio members, meaning they attend but they don't have a vote, or give the Planning Commission 2 votes and let those Planning Commission members decide which of the 2 members will vote. I think to cut any Planning Commission member out of this group is not a good idea, and that's one reason I wanted a larger group.
But they're not being cut out, Susan. They're not being cut out. They're 2 separate. They're not being cut out. That's not correct. It's not accurate. There's a hierarchy that gets served by this. The task force does the first piece of it, then it gets handed to the Planning Commission.
I know
And they will
exactly.
have, well, then don't say they would get cut out, because that's not true.
Removed from the committee, whatever term you wish, to have them not appointed to the committee, if that's the way this is going, and I don't know how Mr. Quigley is going to decide, but I would suggest that the Planning Commission members who are not taking the designated spot at that meeting be ex officio, or as you mentioned with Mr. Zerby, be there as an alternate with no vote. Because I think that their participation is important, and I think their attendance is important to follow the whole task through, and they've all expressed interest is the other thing. I'm not asking anyone to do anything, attend any meetings that they chose themselves not to do. My feeling is if a Planning Commission member expressed an interest, I want that Planning Commission member on this committee because they think it's important to their task, I think it's important to their task. So if there's another way, if you're going to make a smaller committee to have their participation, I think we should look at another way to do it.
I guess my comment would be that, as Mr. DeLello said, this is an advisory committee, volunteer appointments and ad hoc positions that they're going to develop a plan which in turn goes to the Planning Commission. I think the purpose of it is to get a well-rounded view from different people in the township, maybe not on some boards. I think the view of having a couple of people from the Planning Commission is a good idea from the planning aspect of it, and let these other residents develop some kind of plan that then goes to the Planning Commission, and ultimately, it really decides with the Board of Supervisors. We said that from the get-go, that, they come up with anything, we can accept it or deny it or do whatever we want to do with it. I think the purpose of the board is to get a view from other residents in the township that we may not know, to see
Right.
with the views of the township. So I think that's the direction I'd like to go in. That being said, we'll be here all day, I guess, debating it, but I'd like to make a suggestion following up on what Supervisor Coughlin had said, that having non-voting people. We heard the comments about developers in the township, and the only one that I really know really involved in full-fledged development would be John Westrom. It was pointed out to me that John, he owns quite a bit of land in the township. He's not a full-time resident, but it's my belief that you need people with different views that can understand the whys and why nots of different projects and how things proceed. I've read John's resume a number of different times, and he's involved in one end of Philadelphia to the other in so many different organizations, a lot of them building the trade business. But I think he brings a different view maybe to the board that needs to be discussed, and the planning of Worcester Township. So I'd like to first nominate John Westrom and Dave Zerby. As Chairman DeLello mentioned, Dr. Zerby being a school board member, certainly most of our taxes, except a very, very, very small percentage, goes to the school district. to the township. So the tax basis, we certainly have to understand what's happening in Worcester. So I would like to see, my suggestion is to put John Westrom and Dave Zerby on as informational people, as Supervisor Coughlin suggested. They're non-voting members on it, that they can sit there, give their input, but they don't have a vote in the final outcome. That way, we have a resource person
Okay.
regarding certain things. So I would make that suggestion. That,
Okay.
and their numbers not be counted essentially in the number of people on the committee.
Okay, so you're saying 9 to 11 plus them as being potentially, is kind of where you're thinking?
I would think so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And certainly, I'm fine with 11, again, to get a couple more. My feeling with the Planning Commission, what I come back to is putting 2 people from the Planning Commission on this is typically what we've seen in the other areas. And the way the structure of meetings were in the RFP that we put together, this task force at regular intervals then goes and meets with the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission would a couple of times come and present before us, which is where I think you have every opportunity for all of the Planning Commission members to participate through this process. They're not being excluded in my mind. I think that we limit in terms of this particular task force to 2 individuals on that particular, and I think, and personally, I will nominate Tony Shear as the current chairman of that particular board, and I would nominate Lee Coach. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing Lee's last name. I always do that backwards, as the 2 Planning Commission's members that I would appoint to that.
Well, I would agree with Mr. Scher and suggest Mr. Hulsenbach. The reason being Mr. Hulsenbach has experience as a structural engineer, which I think is valuable technical experience to bring to the table. He's also a relatively recent resident. I think Mr. Scher has been here for, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to say in the 20-year range, so I would consider him a mid-resident. I think Mr. Hulsenbach, oh, he's here. Can you just, have you been here in the township for 8-10 years?
Hold on.
Oh, I beg your pardon, that's not Mr. Hulsenbach.
It is Mr. Holdenbach, but if he's going to answer, he needs to
Okay,
come, and he needs to
okay.
come to the mic. But he's been here for about 5 to 6 years, if
Okay,
my memory serves
so a recent
correct.
resident, and I think we need a recent resident, and then Mr. Scher as a more mid-range resident.
Okay,
Sorry,
so-
Mr. Hulsenbach.
That's fine. So
Not good.
my
Not good
suggestion
wisdom.
on that is that we try to get a base slate together. I don't want it, we won't spend a lot of time on Mike and whether it's Mike or Lee, and try to get to a subset of a workable slate. And then if there's some additional fine tuning to get to a final number, we do that.
That's fine.
So I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
So we're trying to get a slate together. We've now suggested 3 different planning commission members, and instead of us spending 20 minutes arguing about whether one of those planning commission, which of the 2 planning commission members it should be, let's try to get a minimal list first. Try to get from 30 maybe down to 15 as an example, and then get to a final slate that we will vote on, is what I'm suggesting.
So does that?
Go ahead.
Does that
I
mean,
have 3 motions on the table now.
we're not, I don't think we're going to make a motion until the list is.
I don't,
finalized.
logistically, what I'm trying to do, Tommy, is get a slate
Let's have a list.
together, like a full slate, so that we're not treating them as each individual motions.
Right.
But
That would take
he's
forever.
suggesting, in essence, what Steve was saying is put those 2 on the list. You're saying put Mike on the list in addition to Tony. I'm saying put Lee on the list. Let's try to get a list of maybe a workable number, and then we're going to continue to fine tune that to get to one final list that will have a motion on the final list.
Right, that's.
Okay.
what I was
Rick, if I may,
hoping.
Yes.
it may be an idea to arrive at the number first. Is that where you're going? Rather than free-form it. I think if the 3 of you can get together on a number, that might make it easier to put your slate together. If you're doing it another way, that's okay too. That's FYI.
Yeah, I'd hate to limit it and then find someone is not on the list who really should be on the list.
Well, 2 of
Let's
us have
work
said
toward
11,
it.
and one has said 24.
Let's work
So-
toward it. Let's work toward your list and see how close we get. Does that mean, are we all in agreement on Mr. Scher then? Do we have one name?
We're-
Or not
We're just
yet?
making a list here. Let's just get
Well,
our
I
list
didn't mean
together.
for motion purposes. I'm strictly speaking for list purposes.
Tony, Mike, and Lee are the 3 names that you're adding to John Westerman, Dave Zerby, are the names that have been
And-
thrown out at this point.
And the latter, Westerman and Zerby, are non-voting, is that?
That's what Steve had suggested, and that seemed to be in sync with what you were talking about.
I'm fine with that
It's not,
suggestion.
no. I mean, I appreciate it, but we've got to kind of churn through it.
Rick, once again, 11, I think, not going to make it, that maybe I'd even go to 13. I could just read off what I would do to start with.
Okay,
And we
that's
can agree,
fine.
then we have to
That's
start
fine.
somewhere.
That's fair.
If we could just mark it, I'll put mine down as mine, then Susan can do hers, and you can do yours, and we
That's
hash it
fine.
back and forth, and if we come up with agreement, we'll just cross those people on their own.
Okay.
Like 2
fine with
weeks or
me.
something like that?
As I said, I went back and forth on these things, that in order to be fair and honest and doing things the right way, Stephanie Bailey was not on my list, but I'm recommending her. So she'd be my first one.
Agreed.
My second one would be Mr. Bustard.
Also agreed.
My third one would be Miss Winnie Hayes.
Dr.
My next one would be Bert Hines.
Agreed.
My next one, Lee Kosh.
Okay.
My next one, Mark Landis.
Reserve on those two.
My next one, Paul Lees.
Okay.
My next one, George Marks. My next one, Brian Newell.
Okay.
My next one, I missed Jay McKeever. I'm sorry, Jay. Missed Jay McKeever there. Brian Newell. Robert Pace.
Sorry, does that mean Jay's on your list?
What's that again?
Does that mean Jay is on your list?
Jay.
Okay, agreed.
Okay.
Jay. Brian Newell, Robert Pace, Pat Quigley,
Agreed.
Tony Scher, and then John Westrom and Dave Zerby.
As non-voting.
Pat Quigley, okay.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
13.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
I think you had 13 recommendations. Did you count that,
Right.
Mr. DeLello? Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, and then the two, what we're calling alternates or non-voting
Right.
individuals. So Susan, I heard you, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like certainly several of those were individuals that you seem to be in sync on. Is that
That's correct.
fair to say?
That's correct. I would agree with Ms. Bailey, Mr. Bustard, Dr. Hayes, Mr. Hines, Mr. McKeever, Ms. Quigley, and Mr. Scher. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mr. Todd,
So Susan was.
tell me when you're ready. Are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Corbett.
Who was that, Susan?
Karen Corbett.
Karen
the-
Corbett.
The lady who's been speaking several times, Karen Corbett. Ms. Greenawalt. Now I'm having to count. So I've got 10. Mr. Halsenbach. This is tough. I'm taking politics out of this. You all know that I'm registered with a certain party, and the way everybody votes is the way everybody votes. And we had a candidate from the Democratic Party in the supervisor's election who expressed a lot of interest in serving, a lot of interest in the township and the issues in the township. So I'm going to, as I said, try to take politics out of this and evaluate that individual as, in the limited way that I know her, in the things that I heard her speak about and the, also her resume. I feel that her professional qualifications are apt for this committee, so I am going to nominate Ms. Steer. And I think I have one more. Let's make sure that's right. I have one more. Mr. Hiltner. Is that 13?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
13, correct.
I think that's what I have.
Mr. DeLo, if
Yes.
she's done, I think it's unfair to interject. I'll take Supervisor Coughlin regarding the political appointment, that keeping politics out of it. Of course, I ran. Christine was a very good candidate. We had a positive election, but I think that to even bring up the word politics in this selection, I know Art, he's a Republican because we served together. I know Winnie is, but other than that, I wouldn't know who's who as far as what political party they are.
And the
So-
only reason I brought it up is that so many people do know Ms. Steer in that capacity, and I was trying to make clear that it's not in that capacity that I believe she would be a good team member, but in other capacities. Otherwise, I would not have brought it up, and I did not bring it up with any other applicant, by the way, nor do I know what party most of these applicants are with, so.
Well,
That's the only reason I brought it up, Mr. Quigley, because it was to forestall someone else possibly doing that, and to clarify that I did not do it for the reason that she ran, but for the ideas that she expresses and her professional qualifications.
I found as a comment that interjects the political bias that's happening in our country, and I hope we can go beyond that as neighbors and friends in
can too.
Worcester, that it's not about that.
I hope we can go
Politics,
beyond it
you know,
too.
as I said before, I think Christine and I both agreed that we're running as neighbors and friends. It's not about Rs and Ds within Worcester Township. And I think that we have to give, at least I'm somewhat offended by it. I'm not speaking for Mr. Lilello, but I think we're here picking people from within the township. And I can truly say the party didn't enter into it on my account.
Then you're free to agree or disagree based on Ms. Steer's professional qualifications, just like we evaluate every other candidate, because that's how I evaluated this candidate.
Well, once again, I think we had it's like, you can only have so many people on it. We could have everybody on the committee, but then I think it defeats the purpose of it to some extent from my view. That, as you said, we could have 15 or 20 people on the committee. That I think that defeats it. I was coming in with 9, but I really went number a lot higher than I was coming into after hearing the conversations from the people here. So I wasn't, opposed to change. I wasn't set on 9. I wasn't set on 11. Okay, we need to move a little higher. We'll do that. But there's a selection process.
I
So
think we're straight,
thank you.
Mr. DeLello.
Yep, we are, but that's fine. So between those two lists, the only other person I had on mine that wasn't sort of cross-pollinated between your two lists was Alice Mahoney. Ultimately, was just one other person that I had.
And I would agree with that.
But in terms of, it looked like 13, Steve was willing to go to 13 with 2 alternates. I know you wanted a higher number. I was originally thinking a smaller number, so I guess it's, I come back to 2 planning commission members, not all 5. You've kind of accounted for all 5, or at least.
I can change from Mr. Holzenbach to Ms. Mahoney. That was actually a tough decision. That was my last pick. And I was wavering between Alice and Mike. So if that makes it easier, does it? Make it any easier?
Yeah, I could live with Alice
Okay.
as opposed to that, but then I got to figure out, it's like, who do you kick off the bus? So I kind of looked at, I had both Jay and George Hittner on my list. I can't have them both, and when it's kind of doing the numbers, I don't know ultimately who would be the better of the 2. I think they're both capable, but since I think you all had Jay, I'll lean to Jay.
Not choosing George, sorry.
Mr.
No.
Lello,
Yeah.
I think, once again, going over the list,
Yeah.
I ran Alice through she was one of my many lists. She was on that list, so I don't have a problem with Alice as well, that she's been in township a while. She knows a lot of people. She understands, she has come to some of the meetings.
Right.
I think she'd be a good candidate as well, so I would, cast a vote in her favor as well. She was on one of my lists,
Right.
which makes it a problem. You
Right,
raise
so
the number
now
a little higher.
we got kind of Stephanie, Art, Winnie, Bert, Lee, Mark, Paul, George, Brian, Jay, Alice, Bob Pace, Pat Quigley, and Tony Shear, which seemed to have most, and then Susan had Gordon, Ms. Corbett,
I
Ms.
actually,
Greenwell, and Ms. Steer, I think.
I didn't have either Mr. Newhall or Mr. Pace.
You didn't have Newhall or Pace.
I did not. They were not, They were not my first picks.
I like them both for different reasons, but I don't know that maybe one of them comes off.
I think at the comment about Mr. Newell, I think we're trying to, people from different aspects, different
Right.
views, different management abilities or his expertise in certain areas, and, you know, I think he brings a different background, something that we have to be concerned with in the township. I say that as I picked my seat in church the other day as to where I sit. I tend to sit at the back of the church now.
Right.
You know, things are changing in America, and I think that he has some experience in some things we wouldn't really consider sometimes in a board that we have to look at.
Okay. So I'm going to list out a slate, don't, just to try to get his arms around this. So a slate of Stephanie, Art, Winnie, Bert, Lee.
Just a second.
Okay.
Let me just make notes, please.
Well,
Stephanie, Art, Bert.
I'm kind of asking, Tommy can jot it down too, if, just so there's one.
Okay, go ahead.
So Stephanie, Art, Winnie, Bert, Lee, Mark, Landis, Paul Leese, George Marks, Brian Newell, Jay McKeever, Alice Mahoney, Bob Pace, Pat Quigley, and Tony Shear. And then Dr. Zerby and John Westrom as two non-voting alternates.
Okay, so it's that,
Is that 14?
you're 13. I got 13.
I think it was 13 with
Not
the
counting
two
the two
alternates.
at the
But
end.
I'm trying to, we might be maybe one or two heavy, I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, that's 14, and two alternates.
You got 14, did you want to throw one off, or
Yeah, I
can we
would,
attend 14?
I'd love to be at an odd number, and I'd love to, but again, I don't know who to,
Well, we're agreed on a few. Can we start with those? Are we all agreed on Ms. Bailey?
I think the list that we were in agreement on Bailey, Bustard,
Bustard.
Hayes, Hines, McKeever,
Mahoney, I thought.
Mahoney,
Mahoney, McKeever, Quigley, and Scher.
Quigley, and Shear. I think we were all in agreement on.
That's already 8.
I think the other way to look at it is was there one person in particular that anybody had any particular reason not to have them on that? Again, I just would like to get to 13 if we can. I hate to,
Right. I'm fine with George Marks, actually. He's a good architect, lived in the township a long time. If he's ever, I think he's on Mr. Quigley's list. I'm
Yeah.
fine with George Marks. What are we doing about the Planning Commission? We're sort of walking around that right now, except for Mr. Scher.
well, I had Lee and Steve had Lee both on our list, so 2. And then what I had said was that I don't want more than 2 on the task force. I think I was very direct on that.
Well, if you'd like my agreement on Mr. Koch, I would ask for your agreement on Ms. Corbett.
She's not on my list.
Well, I know, I was asking for your agreement. Mr. Marks was not on my list, but I came over, trying to get to the goal. So I guess I'm asking for the same kind of compromise on another one, that you
Well, I've
also
gone from
did
9 to
see.
13. My compromise was going from 9 to 13. But again, whatever.
4.
Well, that's
Right?
the entire list.
No, it's 30.
Okay, well,
Mine's down from 24.
we're going to have some disagreement, obviously.
Right. Well, I tried to reach across. Mr. Marks was not on my list, but I have no actual objection to him. The biggest issue is that I would be giving up one of my picks, but I will agree to Mr. Marks.
It's
I
just,
was hoping that,
they're nobody's picks. I mean,
All
it's
can do the
it's
same
a
thing.
Yep,
well, we all had lists or ideas.
understood.
So I'm asking if one of you can see the same, to do the same for one of my ideas, whether
How-
it's Mr. Hulsenbach, Ms. Corbett, or Ms. Greenewalt, or all 3 of my picks that haven't been considered. Oh, sorry, did we have Mr. Todd?
Todd is not on my list. I do not think that Gordon is a candidate for this task force.
Well, as I said, I just made a compromise, so I feel like it's someone else's turn to do the same thing.
Mr. Chairman, did she compromise, is Brian Newell on, or she want him off?
No, I agreed with I don't want to say that I want anyone off who's been suggested. What I did
Okay.
was Mr. Marks was not one of my 13 picks, but since both of you had him on your list, I am agreeable to having Mr.
So we
Marks.
have an even number, right?
We're at 14, and where I'm looking to
Oh, well-
carve one off if we can, and if we can't, then we stick.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
just,
Well, we're at 14 on your
not that I
list.
wanted to do it, but I'm willing to make one step even further. Compromise is that, because it's brought up, to show you in good partisan, that if Supervisor Coughlin's asked for compromise, I think I'd be willing to go with Christine Steer on it to make it an even number, 15, then we can.
Make it
go
an
ahead.
odd number, you mean?
Make it,
It's my
actually,
odd
make it an
number.
odd number. Put
Okay.
Christine on it, and we go then, rather than sitting here trying to.
So add one
play
instead of
poker with each
subtract
other.
one. Okay.
So now we're agreed on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have that we're agreed on 10. I know that we've all put out more than that, but is that correct on your tally?
Well,
Go down the list again. Bailey?
we're not going to get to 15 agreements, Susan. We're just trying to get to a slate of 15 at this
Well,
point.
we just did. Mr. Quigley made the same gesture I did, and
And he
so we're
handed-
one more.
Right. So the slate that I'm comfortable with is Stephanie, Art, Winnie, Bert, Lee, Mark, Paul, George, Brian, Jay, Alice, Robert Pace, Pat Quigley, Tony, and Christine Steer.
Right, well, that's your slate. I can read my slate out too, but there's no point in doing it again. We have to compromise on the ones that.
No, we need to either make a motion or not. There's 15.
Oh, so you're just putting out the rest of your list as the list? Is that, I just.
No,
need to
most
understand
of,
if
my
that's what
list
you're
is,
doing.
my list is pollinated with both of your lists. I mean, it's.
I didn't have Mr. Koch, Mr. Landis,
I
Mr.
understand that,
Leiss.
Susan. They were on my list and Steve's list, not on your list.
So, okay, so I-
Stephanie, Art, Winnie, Bert, Jay, Pat, Tony, and Alice were on your and my list. So, I mean, there's a bunch that are on all our lists. There are some that are not.
I just need to know what we're doing. Okay, Mr. Quigley, I think, asked if there was anyone on that list that anyone had an issue with. I don't want to say it's an issue, but I would not agree with Mr. Landis' name, let's put it
Who's
that
that?
way. Mr.
Landis?
Landis,
Mr.
Okay.
Landis?
correct. I don't want to say I have an issue, but I can compromise on Koch, Leiss. I don't know Mr. Newhall at all. I mean, I read his quals, but I'm going to have to trust you all. And Pace. Oh, Pace, the one. Let me just
Well-
look at my list for a second.
I'm not going to battle with names saying different things, but I think the purpose of the committee is to have a broad section of people in Worcester. Mr. Landis is a name that I'm looking at that I think he's lived in the township. Not that that matters, but well over 60 years. He's been involved in different committees in the township.
Actually,
And you
haven't
talk
heard
about
from him in a
wanting,
long time.
about saving Worcester, this, that, and the other thing. I think Mark, he goes both ways. He listens to both sides of the story and makes a decision. He doesn't go one way or the other. So I think we go back and forth. I think Mr. DeLillo read a list of 15 names, and at this point, we can sit here until,
No, I'll agree on Pace. I just looked at the resume again, although I don't know the gentleman personally from his resume. I'll agree on Pace. If he's on your list as well, Mr. DeLillo? Is that correct or not?
We have a slate of 15.
I'm asking you if
We're-
Pace was on your list.
He was on my list, yes.
Okay.
But we have a slate, but we're not, what Steve is saying is, we have a list of 15 plus 2 alternates with non-voting rights. I'm prepared to present that slate for a motion.
Yes,
is
I
what it comes
quite-
down to.
I quite see.
Are you prepared with that list of 15 if I make the
yes,
motion?
yes,
Okay,
sir.
so I make a motion that we appoint to the Comprehensive Plan Task Force, let me try to get, so Stephanie Bailey, Art Bustard, Winnie Hayes, Bert Hines, Lee Koch, Mark Landis, Paul Leese, George Marks, Brian Newell, Jay McKeever, Alice Mahoney, Bob Pace, Pat Quigley, Tony Shear, Christine Steer, Dr. David Zerby as an alternate with non-voting rights, and John Wenstrom as an alternate with no voting rights.
14 plus 2 alternates, did I
I
count
think it was
right?
15 plus 2 alternates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 plus 2 alternates. Tommy, did I get that right?
Yes.
Oh, Newhall? Did you have Mr. Newhall?
I did.
Okay, and I missed that one. Okay, I've got the tally.
We're all good?
Somebody's got to make a second. I made the motion.
I'll make, you made a second, I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. As I say, nobody likes to see the sausage being made, but hopefully it's a workable group. I'm glad we're moving that forward.
All of the volunteers who were selected and those who were not. Thank you all for your interest in doing this. And those who weren't selected does not mean you can't come to every meeting and have input. Excuse me. They are all public meetings. All the meetings will be advertised. There's opportunity for public input and comment at every meeting, so please do come, even if you weren't selected, and provide your input.
So folks, the next chunk of our agenda is a lot of remedial business. If we want to just take a 1-minute recess, if anybody didn't want to stay for some of to set the holiday schedule and things like that, certainly if somebody wants to take this opportunity to exit, that certainly is fine. I won't be offended. But we'll just take a 1-minute recess if anybody wants to do that. Did you have a... hold on. So what do one?
Yes.
Okay, folks, thanks for your patience. We're going to get started back up here again with some super exciting motions and resolutions. So the next item on our agenda, if I have my place correct, Tommy, is H, which is the holiday meeting and schedules. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Item H, I move that we set the holiday schedule as in item sub A, if you all have that in your packet. For the meeting schedule, I'm going to recommend that item 5, the Board of Supervisors 2021 Reorganization Meeting, be held on January 4th, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. in Community Hall. Otherwise, the meeting schedule as set, I would move forward.
So you're just talking about the reorganization. I just want to make sure I got my
Correct, as
right.
we've
Which item is
discussed.
that?
Yes,
That's
the
item.
5,
Got it.
Roman 5 under B.
Steve, you got any issue with moving the meeting to night next year on January 4th, 2021?
Not really, but, 7:30 gets later. I mean, we have a work session. Can it be earlier than that? Once again, I think, as I said, we did it earlier.
Yep.
We see the change in the township. More people are involved. Are
you thinking like 6:30, but
If
do
you
the night
make
meeting,
6:30
do
be a
it at
problem?
6:30?
I
Is
mean,
that an issue? I don't mind moving it to the night. I mean, again,
6:30 is tougher for working people to get in from far away, obviously if they work next door, but I picked 7:30 because that's the time of our business meetings. So when we normally do business and have, official action is at
Yeah.
7:30, and that's why I selected 7:30.
I don't have a problem with, but, 7:30 is just,
Okay,
in January, it's later if you have older people coming out.
We have plenty of notice. We all
Okay.
have adequate notice of
got
that
it.
for
So
our
there's a
schedule.
motion with that one change?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the motion.
I'll second that motion, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item on our agenda is what categorizes as other establishments. It's a motion to set township depositories, treasury and assistant treasury bond amounts, vehicle reimbursement rate, and the newspaper of record. This is also in the packet, which is at the bottom of that page, and I think it
Yeah, I just
as
had-
well.
All right, I move to set township depositories, treasurer, and assistant bond amounts, vehicle reimbursement rate, and the newspaper of record.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item on our agenda is a resolution, and it is our first resolution. So 2020-01, which is a resolution to authorize certain activities conducted by the Worcester Township Volunteer Fire Department. We obviously have several things we do for them each year, and this sort of puts all of it into one single resolution.
I move we accept Resolution 2020-01, authorizing the fire department to conduct certain activities, including picnics, the annual 5K race and chicken barbecue, the ladies' craft show, seasonal Santa visits, and the provision of traffic control for Montgomery County annual flu shot program and community parades.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next resolution is 2020-02, which is a resolution for the establishment of a fee schedule for 2020.
I move we accept Resolution 2020-02, establishing a fee schedule as set in the packet.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item is Resolution 2020-03, which is a resolution to appoint the township auditor.
I move we pass Resolution 2020-03, appointing B. Bergwall and Company as the township auditor.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have Resolution 2020-04, which is a resolution to establish the township manager's salary for 2020 and to approve the township manager employment agreement.
Before there's a motion, I have a few questions. The township manager's salary is proposed to increase from $136,356 per year to $137,035 per year. Have we had a performance evaluation that I was not aware of to justify an increase?
It's a personnel matter. We're not going to discuss it here, other than to say we did have a meeting about that in 2019, which you participated in. It was not, that's all I'm going to say on that.
That was a performance evaluation for 2019, or, sorry, for 2018, which did take place in early 2019. What I'm asking is, have we had a performance evaluation for
It's a-
2019 performance?
You have not missed anything with regard to that. We're not going to discuss it as a personnel matter in this
No, we
meeting.
are not discussing a personnel matter. That's not what I'm asking. To my knowledge, there has not been a performance evaluation for 2019. Is that correct? Of the manager?
Susan, I don't know how many different ways I need to say it. We did not have any meeting relative to your question. You
Right.
did not miss
Okay.
anything.
Okay. So
His
there's
salary
been
is
no
set,
performance
his
evaluation.
salary is set based on his existing contract. It's a set amount increase each year. I'm 1,000% comfortable with this modest increase for him relative to the work that he does here and how well he has performed in that task.
Mr.
So-
Chairman, I'll make,
Can you show me where the increase is in the contract? Because the contract's right here. I'm seeing salary 1, and of course, it was a different number at the time when he was hired in 2015, and I didn't see anything about increases, unless you do.
The salary increase is not in the agreement. The
Correct.
township had established salary ranges for all of its employees. We did a study a few years ago to make sure that the amount we were paying our employees was both fair to the employee and fair to the taxpayer. Each year, those salary ranges increase 0.5%. 0.5%. The township adopted a budget that provided for, on average, a 3% salary increase for all of our employees. In 2016, I voluntarily capped my salary to the minimum in that salary range. And to my knowledge, I'm the only township manager in southeastern Pennsylvania who has done such a thing. The 0.5% increase that is noted on this resolution is the minimum salary to be paid to my position on our salary schedule.
And that, all I asked was, Mr. DeLello said the increase was in the employment agreement, so I asked where it was, and it's not. So thank you for the clarification, it's not in there. Nevertheless, it is as you have stated. The other question I had was, is this a joint motion also for the employment agreement? Because there are changes there. Are you doing a joint motion or salary and agreement separately?
They're the same motion, Susan, and the document is the same document that we approved last year, is my understanding. Tommy, is that correct?
It is.
The employment agreement is exactly the same one.
Yes.
then why are we approving it again? It was not capped at 1 year.
As we discussed last year, the second-class township code allows the Board of Supervisors to provide a manager contract. However, that contract cannot exceed 2 years or the reorganization following a local election, which is today.
Okay, that's a reason for having this again, and that's what I was looking for. Thank you for the clarification. That's all we
Mr.
needed.
Chairman, I'll make that motion for Resolution 2024-04, the resolution to establish township manager's salary for 2020 and to approve the township manager's employment agreement.
I will second that. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Let me get back to where I am here. Okay, so next item on the agenda is Resolution 2020-05, which is a resolution authorizing the destruction of certain public records in accordance with Act 428 of 1968 and the Municipal Records Manual. Tommy, can you just confirm what we're getting rid of here and kind of what we're following as sort of our standard protocol on this?
Yeah, several years back, the township adopted a resolution declaring its intent to follow state laws with regards to the retention and disposition of records. In order to meet state law, each year the township considers a resolution at its reorganization meeting identifying those public records which have matured from the records retention schedule, which requires certain types of records to be retained for a certain number of years. The resolution before the board this afternoon shows that those records that we normally destroy each year that have since our last reorganization meeting have matured off the schedule. So the documents range from payroll information to general correspondence, all the types of pieces of paper that we have.
Right.
It's a common housekeeping item for municipalities, common sense way to make sure we're retaining the records we should, but not being overwhelmed by a mountain of paper over time.
Thank you, Tommy. The one question I guess I would ask to that is just to confirm that when we're disposing records, we're obviously not disposing anything that would be required to be maintained for, rights and requests and things of that nature. I know that's come up in the past.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. I'll entertain a motion if somebody wants to make it.
Chairman, I'll make that motion regarding Resolution 2025-05.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any public comment on the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have Resolution 2020-06, which is a resolution to establish emergency service response areas. First, I want to recognize the two gentlemen in the back that have sat patiently while we've gone through many other items on the agenda. Tommy, can you give us just a little info, because I know we did make some changes on the emergency response areas this year.
Governing bodies are responsible to set the emergency response areas in their municipality. That hasn't been done here in quite some time. The last time we took a look at this issue, it was through the county's review of areas in 2007, if I recall. Beginning with this reorganization meeting and moving forward, we'll take a look at our emergency response areas on at least an annual basis. When we took a look at the existing areas, it was noted that things have changed quite some time. And staff, in specific, Andrew and Dave, went about trying to identify the areas that would reflect the closest ambulance to individual homes. That wasn't what we had adopted since 2007, so we are proposing some adjustments. And again, the adjustments do not introduce or remove any of the existing ambulance providers, just altering the service boundaries to ensure that a home is as close to an ambulance headquarters as possible, an ambulance station.
Thank you, Tommy.
And this selection is done at the 911 call center, not by a caller themselves, correct?
The township identifies the service areas, and then when a call goes into 911, depending on the type of call, there is levels of calls. the county will dispatch an ambulance. And there's always communication among the ambulance companies if somebody is tied up and unavailable, if somebody is closer. So there is some flexibility built into the system to handle an individual call on a call-by-call basis.
And that's what I meant, that it's not the caller who selects which ambulance
Correct.
to call. They call 911, 911 selects the closest and also the most available.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I move we pass Resolution 2020-06, establishing emergency service response areas.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have Resolution 2020-07, which is a resolution to amend the Worcester Township Personnel Manual. Tommy, maybe just give us a what's changing briefly? if
Yeah,
that's-
two items. In late 2018, during our annual performance evaluations, a couple of employees suggested that we take a look at bereavement leave, and we did that over the past several months, in specific looking at the policies of all of our neighboring municipalities, and saw that our leave benefit was a little light. So what we have done is suggested increased leave for an immediate family member and what we'll call a second tier of relatives to 5 consecutive days and 3 days respectively. The second change is to correct the folks who are classified as exempt employees. Right now, the personnel manual includes in that category myself and the Public Works Director. There is a third employee in the Finance Director, and this revision will provide for that recognition.
Okay.
I move that we accept Resolution 2020-07, amending the Worcester Township Personnel Manual in the matter of bereavement leave and the classification of position, work schedule, and pay regulations as to exempt staff.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have a ratification of hire, which is a motion to ratify the hire of Aaron Moses, a public works laborer, a full-time employee.
I move we ratify the hire of Aaron Moses as a public works laborer full-time.
Second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have other business. Does anybody have any other business they wish to discuss before this board at this time?
Mr. Chairman, just one item regarding some of the real estate the township owns within the township. I don't really want to discuss it today, just bring it up. Maybe we can start the process of some of the real estate, looking at the budget, some of the money coming in, especially the property on Hollow Road, maybe can be used better for the township rather than being a rental property that, you know, I know people are living there before people are moved out. If we're looking at this and move forward on something on that property, I'd just like the people to be aware of that so we're not, you know, asking a family to move rather quickly. I know Worcester doesn't move very quick, but if, I'd just like to put it on the agenda for sometime in the future, we can start discussing the property. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Does anybody else have any other business? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Folks, thanks for coming. We beat last year's record by 15 minutes. We're going to call that progress. Enjoy your day.